There's always a moment right before someone changes their life, when they suddenly become hard to reach. The replies get shorter. The late-night online status disappears. They stop posting every thought. Every plan, every little win, even their closest friends start saying things like, "He's been acting different lately." And from the outside, it almost looks sad, like someone slowly disappearing from the world. But what most people don't realize is that this disappearance is often the beginning of a level up, because successful people usually don't rise while everyone is watching, they vanish first. There's someone who used to talk a lot about his future. Every few weeks he had a new idea, a new plan, a new obsession. He watched motivational videos at 2 a.m., filled notebooks with goals, imagined a completely different life for himself. And for a while, talking about success felt almost the same as achieving it. But eventually, something strange started happening. The more he talked, the more emotionally exhausted he felt. Not physically tired, mentally exposed. Every conversation about his goals started feeling like pressure instead of excitement. Every opinion from other people slowly entered his head. Some laughed politely. Some doubted him without saying it directly. Some acted supportive while quietly expecting him to fail. And the worst part is, none of them even realized they were doing it. Psychologically, human beings are deeply affected by social energy. The brain constantly tracks approval, rejection, comparison, and status. When you announce a dream too early, your mind starts consuming emotional reward before the work is even done. Dopamine gets released simply from talking about future success. Your brain feels temporarily satisfied, even though nothing has actually changed yet. That's why some people become addicted to announcing goals instead of building them. But eventually, reality catches up, and for certain people, that realization changes everything. One day, he stopped explaining himself. Not dramatically, not with some big speech. He just quietly pulled away. The group chats became muted. The unnecessary conversations stopped. He stopped trying to convince people that he was serious. At first, people assumed something was wrong with him. But internally, something else was happening. For the first time in years, his energy was no longer leaking into everybody else's opinions, and that changes a person more than most people understand. The human brain is extremely sensitive to attention. Every interaction costs mental energy. Every notification slightly interrupts focus. Every unnecessary conversation forces the brain to switch contexts. Modern psychology calls this attention residue. Even after a conversation ends, part of your mind remains attached to it. Most people never notice how mentally crowded they are. That's why disappearing often becomes necessary before growth, not because someone hates people, not because they think they're better than everyone else, but because silence creates psychological space. And psychological space changes identity. There's a certain loneliness that appears when someone starts evolving mentally. It's difficult to explain because nothing dramatic is happening externally. They still wake up in the same room, still see the same streets, still look mostly the same, but internally, they no longer fit inside their old life. The conversations that once entertained them now feel repetitive. The habits that once felt normal start feeling self-destructive. Even certain friendships begin to feel emotionally heavy, and this is where most people become confused. Because growth doesn't always feel inspiring. Sometimes it feels like grief. The brain naturally resists identity change, because identity creates psychological safety. Even unhealthy routines feel comforting when they're familiar. So when someone starts disconnecting from old behaviors, the mind experiences tension. Part of them wants progress. Another part wants comfort. That internal conflict is exhausting, and during this phase, people often disappear socially because they're rebuilding themselves privately. There's someone who slowly stopped seeking validation online. He still opened apps sometimes out of habit, still scrolled for a few minutes, still watched everybody else displaying their lives like performances. But something inside him changed. He noticed how distracted everyone seemed, including himself. People were constantly reacting, commenting, posting, proving, explaining. Everybody wanted to be seen. Everybody wanted evidence that they mattered. But the people who were truly changing their lives quietly stopped performing it, because real transformation usually happens in silence. The gym progress nobody sees, the discipline nobody claps for, the night spent learning something difficult while everyone else is distracted, the uncomfortable self-awareness, the private sacrifices That part never looks exciting, and maybe that's why so few people stick with it. The brain loves visible rewards. Humans are socially wired to seek recognition, but long-term success requires tolerating periods where there is no applause at all, no reassurance, no immediate proof that the effort is working. Psychologically, that's one of the hardest things a person can experience, to continue without visible results, to trust a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. That's why disappearing becomes emotional. Not just practical, because while everybody else thinks someone became distant, internally they're fighting a psychological war against distraction. Insecurity, comfort, fear, and self-doubt, and most people lose that war because they never learn how to sit alone with themselves. Silence exposes everything, the insecurity you avoid, the habits you hide behind, the fear of wasting your life, the uncomfortable realization that maybe you've been performing productivity instead of actually changing. That's why many people stay constantly entertained. Noise protects them from self-awareness. But successful people eventually become willing to face that silence, not because it feels good, because it becomes necessary. There's a moment where someone realizes they can't keep consuming the same environment if they want a different future. So they start protecting their attention more carefully. They become selective about conversations, selective about energy, selective about where their mind goes every day. And from the outside, this can look cold. But psychologically, it's often self-preservation. The human nervous system absorbs emotional environments constantly. Spend enough time around negativity, gossip, chaos, or low ambition, and your brain slowly adapts to it as normal. This is called emotional contagion. People unconsciously mirror the emotional patterns around them. That's why environments shape identity, more than motivation does. And sometimes, the only way to protect a new version of yourself is to temporarily disappear from the environment that created the old one. But here's the part nobody talks about. Disappearing doesn't instantly make someone confident. In fact, during the beginning, it often makes them feel lost. There are nights where he questions everything. Nights where progress feels invisible. Nights where he wonders if isolation is turning him into someone emotionally disconnected. Sometimes he almost reaches for his phone just to feel temporarily close to people again. Because humans are social by nature. Even ambitious people get lonely. But slowly, something starts changing. His thoughts become clearer. His emotional reactions become calmer. He stops needing constant reassurance. He becomes less reactive to comparison. And most importantly, he starts building self-trust. That's the hidden psychological shift behind leveling up. Success isn't only about money, status, or discipline. It's about developing a mind that no longer collapses without external validation, and that process usually happens privately. There's a reason why many successful people seem different after a period of isolation. It's not because success magically changed their personality. It's because solitude forced them to meet themselves honestly, and honesty changes people. When someone spends enough time alone, they eventually notice patterns they used to ignore. The procrastination, the emotional avoidance, the excuses disguised as personality traits, the fear hidden underneath humor and distraction. Self-awareness becomes unavoidable, and once someone truly sees themselves clearly, they can't unsee it anymore. That's when real growth begins, not when motivation peaks, not when everybody supports you, not when life becomes easy. Real growth begins the moment someone becomes willing to disappoint the version of themselves that wanted comfort over transformation. That's why the disappearance phase matters so much, because externally, it looks like nothing is happening. But internally, identity is being rebuilt, piece by piece, habit by habit, thought by thought, and eventually people start noticing the results without understanding the process behind them. They see the discipline, the confidence, the focus, the emotional control, but they never saw the isolation that created it. They never saw the quiet nights, the uncomfortable self-reflection, the moments where someone almost gave up but continued anyway. That part remains invisible, and maybe that's exactly how it's supposed to be. Because the strongest transformations usually happen away from attention, in silence, in uncertainty, in moments where nobody is watching. So, if someone suddenly becomes quieter, if they disappear for a while, if they stop explaining every move they make to the world, maybe they're not falling apart. Maybe they're finally building something real.